This memory of mine begins about 3 years ago when I graduated high school. I had grown up with my grandparents, but decided to move to a different and much larger city to live with my dad for the first time in 12 years. I somewhat knew the city already because I spent my summers with him, but this would be the first time I would have the freedom of an adult, to come and go as I pleased, drive my car anywhere, smoke cigarettes whenever I wanted. I was excited, though admittedly a bit sad to leave all my friends behind. As soon as I was settled in, my dad and stepmom sat me down to discuss the few rules they had and what things I needed to know about the complex. Basic stuff, like letting them know when I'm leaving and coming home, and parking on the street to free up the apartment lot for other tenants. Then my dad chimed in. "Oh, one more thing. There's the neighborhood creep." The guy's name was George. He was well known to all the women in the complex, as well as to the police that patrolled the area. He was tall and overall kind of huge, very intimidating looking. They were pretty confident he'd leave me alone though, because he knew that my dad lived in our unit. It turns out he made a habit of stalking most of the women in the building, but as soon as he realized that there was another man in their life, he'd back off. It didn't really matter the relationship, whether they were a brother, a partner, or a father, or even whether or not they looked particularly intimidating. Just the presence of another man would keep him away. Since my dad was also quite tall and big, I felt pretty confident that I'd be alright. And I was, for a time. It started about 6 months after I had moved in. My stepmom and dad were fighting even more than usual, until finally she up and left him. One night I was sitting on the porch having a cigarette and browsing Facebook or something. I wish I could say that I felt like I was being watched, that my instincts were good enough to keep me alert, but honestly, I probably just looked up because I felt a bug or something. George was standing about 15 feet away, slightly concealed behind a tree, staring intently at me. I nearly dropped my cigarette. Shakily, I stubbed it out and went inside. I was home alone, so I made sure to lock all my doors before heading to my room to play video games. I told myself I was probably just being paranoid. The next morning I got up for my morning cigarette and a coffee. Lo and behold, minutes after I got onto my porch, George came ambling out of his apartment to look my way. I sucked down my cigarette and went back inside. This pattern continued for a few weeks. It was like George was just standing at a sliding glass door, peeking out and waiting to see when I would emerge. I told my dad about it, so he started coming outside with me when I smoked whenever possible. If he was with me, George wouldn't even so much as peek out of his door. Of course, the other women in the complex have already tried to call the police about George, but he lives there, and staring isn't a crime, so there wasn't much they could do. I didn't know how far George had taken it with the other woman before. With that info in mind, I knew that calling the cops wouldn't be much use. Things slowly escalated from there. Once my stepmom left, I had access to her parking spot, giving me 3 potential routes from my car to my apartment, depending on where I parked. One way brought me just past George's apartment, about 5 feet from his door. Since I normally got off work pretty late, I avoided that path as much as possible. After a while, though, he figured out my work schedule and would show up on one of the other paths when I was coming home at night. He'd never be directly on the sidewalk, just a few feet away, slightly hiding behind a tree. It was like he thought I couldn't see him. He looked like a child playing hide-and-seek who hadn't quite figured out how to fully conceal themselves yet. You could see about 90% of his body, and you would obviously know he was there. I would rush past him each night, avoiding eye contact, but prepared to scream in case I heard him move towards me. I started carrying my keys between my fingertips, and even bought a pocket knife that I kept halfway open during my walk from my car. My mom started searching for a self-defense class for me around this time, since I couldn't afford one on my tight budget. My dad was getting steadily more and more pissed off as George's behavior escalated over the months. If my dad wasn't home, I'd lock my bedroom door and keep my knife under my pillow. I'd Skype all night with my boyfriend just to feel safe, and so he could call 911 for me if I needed him to. I even started putting a bunch of flower pots in front of my bedroom window so no one could sneak in silently. Nightmares of being kidnapped or raped or murdered started invading my sleep every night. One day, my neighbor Shell was gossiping with me and asked if I had heard the news about George. Apparently, he was arrested the night before. About 10 minutes before I was supposed to come home that night, some lady and her kid walked by the electrical power box to see George sitting there, masturbating. I wondered if he'd been waiting there for me, knowing that I parked right next to that electric box every night. I was creeped out, but relieved of my George-related stress for a few days. However, it wasn't long before he was released, and when he came home, he was right back to the same old routine. One night, he got even braver. It was around 7 p.m. when I went outside for a cigarette with my dad. One of our neighbors came by and struck up a conversation with him, and we all noticed George come outside and start staring in my direction. My dad muttered something under his breath about how the guy was asking to get his ass beat, so I rolled my eyes and headed inside to play some more video games. I was healing in a World of Warcraft dungeon when I suddenly heard Shell shouting outside like she was looking for someone. I was healing though, which is a pretty important job, and I figured she was talking to someone else, so I just continued with my game. A moment later, she burst into my room in a panic, her eyes huge. She hopped from foot to foot frantically and shouted at me. "He's bleeding!" "Who?" I asked in bewilderment. "Your dad! Come quick!" I scoffed, annoyed that I would have to leave my group, and got up from the computer to grab our first aid kit. I was used to my dad doing stupid things like tossing his pocket knife in the air and trying to catch it, so I figured something like that had happened again. When I stepped outside, though, I found myself facing a real horror. About 6 people were surrounding my dad, and my neighbor Caleb was holding a shirt to his side. He was facing away from me, and I could see that his entire back was covered in blood. It looked like he had been mauled by a bear. Caleb's hold on the shirt slipped, and blood sprayed out from my dad's side. I still feel queasy when I think about it. Blood makes me lightheaded, and I get anxiety so easily, so I'm the last one who would normally be called in on an emergency. However, in this case, everyone in the area, except for Caleb, was in a total panic. I needed to be strong in this moment. I threw the first aid kit to the side and told Shell where we kept our towels, then asked if anyone had called 911. They looked towards me with blank expressions, as if they had never even heard of 911 before. "No," my dad protested. "I can't afford an ambulance." I told him to shut up and tell me what happened, and he told me that George had stabbed him. I immediately dialed 911 on my cell phone and told them what was going on. The operator had us continue applying pressure while we waited for the ambulance. My dad was a true champ throughout. Even though the sidewalk was puddled with blood, he stayed on his feet until someone ran and grabbed him a chair. When the trucks arrived, I ran to show the police where George lives, and then ran back to bring the paramedics to my dad. They were cold and painfully slow. I was tempted to yell at them to hurry up, but I guess I'm glad I didn't. I later found out that paramedics don't run to avoid adrenaline rushes so that they can stay calm and steady during emergencies. I tried to join my dad in the ambulance, but the police had me stay behind to give my statement. I quickly relayed all of my dad's allergies to the medics before they sped off. I told the police what I knew about what had happened, and they had me sit outside on the sidewalk for a few hours while giving me updates about my dad. I was able to keep it together long enough to call my job and my dad's boss, but once I finished all of my phone calls, I finally allowed myself to break down. It felt like the tears would never stop. One of the cops was nice enough to stop inside and grab my cigarettes and a bottle of water. He stayed with me, I'm sure mostly to make sure I didn't run off, but he was very nice and helped me stay calm. George had been waiting in his apartment when the police came. When they pulled him out towards the big group of cop cars that had surrounded the building, he was still trying to stare at me. Finally, I stared right back, and I felt more hatred in that moment than I have ever felt in my life. I wanted to walk right up to him and murder him on the spot. The cop who had been sitting with me pointed his flashlight in George's face to make him look away. My dad was in the hospital for 9 days. I found out during that time that he had shouted at George to leave me alone after I went inside, which prompted George to start shouting back and challenge him to talk face to face. My dad hopped over the porch and marched towards him, and George pulled out a 12-inch blade he had strapped to the side of his leg. Luckily, the blade barely missed my dad's kidney, but did end up puncturing his lung and damaging his diaphragm. During the scuffle, before my dad realized he had been stabbed, George got him in the back with another shorter knife he had in his pocket. The blood stayed on the pavement until the next afternoon, when my neighbors were finally nice enough to wash it off for me. My dad ended up spending more time in the hospital in critical condition than George spent in jail. Throughout those days, so many women approached me whenever I was outside. They all told me to thank my dad and talked about how George had been terrifying them for so long. He had stashed knives around the entire apartment complex and would frequently expose himself to the woman when they were alone. George's attempted murder charge was unfortunately dropped, but my dad and I have a lifelong restraining order against him. My dad's doing all right now, but he's still in and out of surgeries, trying to repair the internal damage from the attack. I truly believe I owe my life to my dad. Who knows how long it would have been before George's harassment moved beyond staring, and he finally decided to use one of those knives on me. When I was 11 in 1984, my family and I moved to a beautiful old craftsman-style house. I heard it was around 80 years old at the time. Soon after we moved in, we found it was infested with cockroaches. I've never seen anything like it. You'd turn on the lights at night and they'd scatter from every surface. We had to store all of our food that wasn't canned in the fridge so they wouldn't get into it. We tried bug bombs and professional exterminators numerous times, but to no effect. Those things really can survive a nuclear war. Anyway, they weren't the reason we lived in the house less than a year before fleeing for our lives. I just thought it was an interesting side story. To this day, roaches are near the top of my most detested bugs list. I remember my mom discussing our next-door neighbor's creepy son with my grandma. He was in his 20s or 30s. She'd been doing dishes one day and looked up to see him standing directly on the other side of the kitchen window, staring in at her. Normally, she would have kept something scary like this from us kids, but worried about our safety, she told us to tell her if we ever saw him near the house, and that we weren't allowed to play outside alone. Years later, she revealed to us that there were a couple times when she woke up to see him standing over her bed, and one time that he put a cloth with chemicals over her face to knock her out. This is the part of the story I know the least about, since she didn't tell us until we were much older. I think she must have assumed she was dreaming through these, especially if he was drugging her. I don't know if anything else happened during those experiences. I've never asked her about it, just in case something did, and asking about it would bring up bad memories. One afternoon, we were all doing some spring cleaning when my brother said he found a cigarette butt in the upstairs toilet. This was weird. Nobody in our family smokes. Being an innocent little 6-year-old, he flushed it before telling our mom. I still remember her trying to get the entire story out of him, being upset that the evidence was gone and thinking he might have been mistaken, or maybe that he had picked up the butt somewhere outside out of curiosity. It's tough to get an accurate story out of kids. She soon dropped it, and we mostly forgot about it. A few weeks later, my brother was spending the night at our grandparents', and my sister and I were the only ones upstairs. Our mom's bedroom was downstairs. My sister heard a sound like a screen door slamming, but she insisted it was coming from inside the house and was completely freaked out. I told her it was just something outside and that she should just go back to sleep. Only a moment later, we heard a muffled cough coming from just outside our bedroom door. A man's cough, which sounded like he was trying to keep from making noise. I whispered to my sister that we needed to get downstairs. We snuck out of the room, and I had the irrational urge to turn on the light in the bathroom across the hall from our bedroom, just to check if anyone was there. Right before I was about to do it, I got a strong feeling that we needed to get away from the bathroom and get downstairs right then. Creeping down the stairs in the pitch black was one of the scariest moments of my entire life. It was a spiral enclosed stairway with walls, the perfect place for someone to hide. The light on the stairs was burned out and the wood steps were creaky, making our trek down terrifying. We got downstairs and woke up our mom, panicked that there was a guy upstairs in our bathroom. She started to tell us to go back to bed, but quickly saw how seriously scared we were. She went over to the bottom of the stairway to try and show us that there was nothing to be afraid of, but in that moment, she was also hit with the same instinct that I had felt. She closed the stairway door and called the cops, but they found nothing and didn't really take us seriously. The next day, she called a private detective friend of hers from high school to come over and inspect the house. Remembering the cigarette butt in the toilet, she had him start by looking at the upstairs bathroom window. It was a high, narrow, rectangular window, not very big, but just wide enough for a person. Who knows how many times the intruder climbed our roof to get in and was upstairs while we were sleeping just across the hall. The window used to swing up on hinges. When my mom's friend let the window drop, it sounded like a screen door slamming, just like my sister and I had heard the night before. He said the locks on all the windows were so old they were practically useless, and we needed to just get out of the house immediately. We moved into my grandparents' house that day. When my mom went with her brothers a few days later to pick up some things, a back door had been smashed open, but nothing in the house was disturbed. A few years later, we heard that the neighbor's son was arrested for rape and attempted murder. I still wonder what might have happened if we hadn't listened to our gut feelings that night. I also wonder if the house is still infested with cockroaches. When I was growing up, my older brother raced flat-track motorcycles, so he was usually out with my dad most weekends during the racing season. Occasionally, I would tag along with my mom and younger sister, but Mom wasn't super into it, so she'd usually just keep us home and find fun things for us girls to do together instead. This particular story happened in 1987. During one of the weekends, we decided to stay home. I was 10 and my sister was 8. It started out like any other Saturday where my dad and brother were out of the house. My mom took us to McDonald's for lunch, we went to the mall for a while, and then we came home to play Monopoly and watch cable. Around 10 at night, my sister and I were getting sleepy, so my mom brought out the sleeping bag so we could all sleep in the living room together. Hours after I fell asleep, around 2 a.m., someone started banging on our front door. The door had 4 large panels of glass that weren't fully opaque, so we had covered them with small curtains. We woke up to the pounding and rushed to the door to peek out one of the glass panes. Outside, we saw a girl, probably in her late teens or early 20s. I remember she was wearing a white and blue windbreaker. She was frantic and crying and begging my mom to let her in. Her boyfriend was chasing her, and she was afraid he was going to kill her. My mom remained calm despite how horrifying the situation was. "I'm sorry, love. I can't let you in. I've got 2 young children with me, and I can't risk your boyfriend harming them if he gets in here. I can call the police for you if you just stay there." Of course, this didn't sit well with the girl. She started crying more and pointed to her foot, which was broken and in a cast. "Please, ma'am, you have to let me in. He's coming for me." Again, my mom politely refused and turned to run to the kitchen and called 911. Our phone was mounted on the wall with a ridiculously long cord, so she was able to reach back to the door while on the phone with dispatch to let the girl know that police were on the way. To our surprise, this made the girl even more irate. "I don't need the police. I'll be dead before they get here." My mom apologized again, but remained firm that she was not going to open the door. At this point, the girl just turned around and walked off into the darkness. About 5 to 7 minutes later, the police showed up. My mom was giving them a statement when my dad and brother arrived home from the race. My dad didn't even turn off the truck before running inside, looking terrified and asking what was going on. While my mom was explaining what had happened, another officer walked over to tell them that he hadn't found anyone, but did find a shoe in the street in front of our house. The police left, and we all sat in the living room together to decompress. I remember thinking that my mom hadn't been very nice to the girl and should have just let her in. Many years later, in 2001, about a week after I gave birth to my first son, family and friends filled my house to coo over the baby. After most people had headed home and it was just my parents and sister left, I started commenting on the new neighborhood we had moved to. I told them I didn't really love the area, but I was proud to have my own home with my husband. I guess something about sitting in my living room reminded my sister of that night many years ago. "Hey, Mom, do you remember that lady that came to our door when we were kids and was trying to come inside because her boyfriend was chasing her or something?" "Yes, very well." I could tell my parents weren't comfortable talking about this because they exchanged nervous glances, but my sister pressed on. "Why didn't you just let her in? I always wondered if her boyfriend did end up killing her." That's when my dad interjected. He said that my mom did the right thing because we were young and we were home alone. Then he told us the end of the story that we had never heard before. They ended up finding her in a car with her boyfriend smoking dope a few blocks over. They had rope, duct tape, 2 shovels, and a shit ton of knives in the trunk. My sister and I both responded in shock and asked why they never told us. My dad said they decided to keep it a secret because they didn't want us to feel unsafe in our own home. Hearing this made me feel awful. I had spent so long thinking that my mom was rude that night and worrying about what could have happened to the girl. Now I know that my mom most likely prevented a home invasion by making that difficult decision to deny the girl entry into our home. Even just writing this out now sends chills down my spine.